So now we're going to get going to talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, at least for a while, which is the leaks. Leaks. And of course, the joke is, but it is no joke, that the only reason that the only time you find an MG that isn't leaking is when there's no oil in it. But since we all drive our cars, we have to suffer the leaks. And the best way to suffer the leaks is to put a pan underneath the engine, wherever it's leaking. It's usually underneath the engine. And whether it's got old newspaper in it, who publishes a newspaper anymore, kitty litter in it, whatever it is, that keeps the floor in your garage from getting so stained from multiple drips of oil. There are several different products that are excellent for pulling that oil out. It's never perfect. You'll never get it all out once it's in there. But even Tide detergent, liquid Tide detergent, scrubbed up a little bit and let set. 409, the purple cleaner from Napa. There's a lot of stuff there that'll help get that oil out of the concrete. But once it's stained, it's all but impossible to get it out. And if you've got an MG or Healy or whatever, and you go to visit your father-in-law, your brother-in-law, your sister-in-law, they've just got a brand new house and a brand new concrete driveway. It's like park in the street, just do it, because they're going to ban you from the driveway unless you can park in the grass or carry something with you to throw underneath the car. MGs just plain leak. They do. Now you can get them down, you can get them so they don't leak, but what a huge process it is. So we're not talking about the non-drivetrain leaks tonight, which would include the cooling system, the brakes, the steering, and the shocks. The rear shocks don't leak. The axle's almost above the oil level. Front shocks can and do leak. The steering leaks out of the pinion, leaks out of the gators, especially if you've just filled it up and either the gators are perforated or failed in some other way, or the seal that rides against the pinion isn't good, or in the earlier cars, the T-types, and the MGAs, it isn't even a seal, it's just a piece of cotton, a wick of cotton in there that does its best to hold it out of there. Or a TC with a steering box that's filled with 140 weight. Doesn't matter what kind of oil you stick in there, it always drips out. Even when there's a seal on the bottom, it just drips out over a period of time. It just can't help itself. Brakes, if you got a leak in the brakes, you can tell because the brake master cylinder is going down. So that's what I happen to notice on my MGA. At the left front wheel, there was some brake fluid on the wheel itself. Very odd, but that's an indicator that that there's a leak going on there. And then cooling leaks, those are the heater control valve. Geez, Craig West was just up here, as I said, week before last. We put a brand new heater control valve on his car. Now that's not exactly true. It had been in the bag for 10 years, okay, but it was never used. Put it on, didn't test it before we put it on. Why would you test a heater control valve before you put it on the car? To see that the little diaphragm inside it had perforated. I didn't check it. It was perforated. It spit antifreeze all over the engine. Anyway, the heater control valve is a really good place for a leak, aside from occasional hose clamp leaks. And then if you overfill your radiator, you fill it all the way up with antifreeze and water, and go out and run the car and then turn it off, the temperature really skyrockets underneath the bonnet up to 230 degrees or so. And that water expands and it'll push out of the cap or out of the overflow, and it'll drip on the ground. And if you then, as a result of that, fill up the cooling system again, it will piss it out again and again and again. So the trick is just let it seek its own level. And that is when you take the radiator cap off and look inside the radiator, or on a 77 through 80B for an MGC or an Austin America, you take off the radiator cap and expect to find the expansion tank about half full. That's good enough. But that's not what we've come here to talk about. We've come to talk about driveline leaks. So we're going to start at the back of the car because that's probably easier. So you've got a differential in the back of the car. As the differential begins to spin and move, it begins to warm up. There is a vent on all the differentials. I cannot tell you where it is on the TC. I don't know. But on the TD, it's on the left-hand side of the tube that goes between the center section of the assembly out to the wheel. And right at 12 o'clock, right at the very top, there's an 1/8 inch hole, which you can barely feel with your fingers. So you can see it with a mirror and a light. Once in a blue moon, that gets plugged up. And when it gets plugged up, then the air inside the differential, once it warms, has nothing to do but put pressure on the oil at the pinion seal and at the hub seals, and it will push oil out of the seal, even though the seals are new. You can't hold back that kind of pressure. So always make sure that it's vented, that the rear axle is vented. Starting with the MGA and the MGBs and the midgets, there's no problem. There's a little mushroom-shaped job on the top of the differential over on the right-hand side that allows air to enter or leave the unit.
How do you do that, John? Just put a paper clip and wiggle it around?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yep. It's about that far outboard when you're looking at the back end of the car, about that far outboard of where it's that tube is welded into that center cast section.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So then you got a pinion seal and you got the rear hub oil seals. Those can leak. On the TCs, they love to leak a lot. And you can reduce the amount of leaking back there or eliminate it by putting in new seals, or in the case of a banjo rear axle, which is TC and the MGAs and the early Bs with the banjo diff and all the midgets, you can buy a speedy sleeve. The rear hub oil seal rides on the axle housing itself, and over a period of time, it creates a trough around the axle tube, and it wears. And you want to have that nice and clean, so you can get a speedy sleeve. Those are made by Chicago Rawhide. I don't know what the numbers are. For the back of the crankshaft, it's an SS350, but back on the rear axle, I can't tell you what that is. Just a moment. And anyway, so the pinion seals you can change on the T-types and the MGAs and the banjo diffs. You can change the pinion oil seal, which is the front oil seal that receives the drive shaft. You just loosen up the nut, tap off the flange, pop the seal out, carefully replace with a new seal. Put a lot of grease on it so that it doesn't start to run dry. Make sure the diff is full of oil, and off you go. On the tubed type differentials, on the later MGBs and MGCs, the torque of that front nut is a critical factor. It's a lot more complicated to change the seal on that one. But the hub seals on the Salisbury tube type GT differentials, those are a dream to change, and those are the same seals that you use on the TD and TF. So those are very easily popped out and new ones put in. There is a spacer on the axle against which the seal rides, which will come off. So if you are changing the hub seal back, the hub seals on both sides, take those spacers out. They got little slits on the side. You can push a screwdriver down in there and wiggle them off. And then put them on your buffing wheel, your wire wheel first, maybe your buffing wheel, and just make them like a mirror, so that the rear hub oil seal's got a real nice smooth surface against which to turn. Always put a lot of grease on those when you put them back together, so that when you start driving, there isn't a problem. I suppose the rear gasket leaks maybe from time to time. That's a pretty odd one. Probably more common with the banjo diffs than with the GT diff. The GT diff has got a much thicker gasket, fits on the back of the unit, and then the drain plug just doesn't leak. It always seems like that's what's leaking because that's where the drip of oil is hanging from. But remember that all oil goes down and all oil goes to the rear. So if it's leaking off the pinion, it ends up one little tiny drop swinging off the bottom of the drain plug. So is it necessary to put gasket compound on the drain plug? No, it isn't necessary. It's an interference fit. Does it help? Sure, of course. So that's the diff. The gearbox doesn't leak oil much. The overdrives do. They just do, and we'll talk about that. But the gearbox has got a vent in it, just like the rear axle does at the top. Now the T-types don't have that vent. It's vented through the remote control. But there's a front seal and a rear seal. The rear seal on a T-type is a great big thick piece of felt. The seal in the front is a normal, what you'd normally consider to be a normal modern lipped seal. Those work out pretty well. The gearboxes can have problems leaking between sections, between the gaskets. And we had a deal maybe 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, where the lay shafts for the MGA gearboxes were supplied too long. You would never know it. You just wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even know to look. We didn't. I didn't until it happened. And so you put the lay shaft in place. It sticks out of the front a little too much. You tighten up the front cover, and the front cover is aluminum. And instead of going on flat, it bows, and it allowed the oil to drip out the bottom. Very, very frustrating. But after we just discovered that the shafts were too long because of that problem, it wasn't a problem again. We had another real bizarre one. We did a complete restoration a long time ago for a guy and his wife. We're doing it for their daughter who just graduated from medical school here at MGA. I think she lives in Idaho. And got the whole car back together, go out and drive it, come on back, puddle of oil underneath the gearbox. This has all been redone. Oh my gosh. So it always looks great when you're done with the restoration. But as soon as you pull the engine out, it doesn't look quite as good as it did. Still looks great, but it doesn't look as good as it did. So we pull the engine, the gearbox out, put all new gaskets and seals on it, put it back in, take it out for a drive. It's still leaking. It's like, come on, come on. So the third time we do a real thorough inspection, and what do we find? But the metal, the aluminum, is too thin right at the top of the gearbox. And so when the gearbox is operating and the oil's getting whipped all around there, it's actually splashing out of the gearbox. I've seen this twice on MGA gearboxes. Very bizarre. Can't tell you where it is in the tail shaft. I probably still have that tail shaft someplace because it was really expensive to go back in there two more times to correct the problem. So this brings up the three types of oil leaks that I talked about. A static leak, where you just park it in your garage and it leaks, okay, just static. Or a passive leak, so that's not a pressure leak. That's the front tappet inspection cover on the engine, on the MGB engine. Or in this case, what we're just talking about, which is why I brought it up, the perforated metal on the casting, on the tail shaft, on the MGA. And once the oil gets thrown around in there, thrown up, then it'll leak out. But it doesn't leak. It doesn't leak just sitting there. So the overdrive leaks at the filter. The filter is a sandwich of filter and then screen and then filter. So where the screen goes between the filter, where the screen goes between the paper gasket, where it goes between the paper gasket, it can wick out of there. Now, I've seen the screens recently and they're good again, but for a while the mesh was great. They did their job, but they also allowed some oil to drip out of there. So you can, when you're putting it together, smear gasket goo all around the outside circumference of the edge of that gasket, and that will help. You can never get rid of it all. Overdrives, this is LH 68 through 80, MGB and MGC. They almost always drip a little bit sometimes. They also drip out of the speedo cable housing. The T-types have no seal in there at all. The MGAs and MGBs do have a seal, but I for as long as I've been doing this, I don't remember a time that I was successful in changing that seal in there. It's a little tiny seal and it's fit way up in there, and I don't remember ever pulling one out. Almost always they're okay, but as time goes on, they won't be okay. So that's another place. And if the oil gets on the speedo cable, then it turns up and up and up to the speedo, and that oil can get in the back of the speedo and wreck the speedo just because it gets it too gooey on the back side there. So now we're down to the engine, which has got static leaks, but only if the drain plug is loose or the gasket's bad or something. The oil does not go over the sump. The oil sits inside the sump, so it doesn't fit above the sump. The sump gasket never leaks. That's a rule. There's always exceptions, but as much as you might think the sump gasket is leaking, it's not. The drain plug is not leaking. The oil is falling down from somewhere above. So the active leaks include the front and rear seals, and because there isn't really oil pressure behind there, but there's so much oil, and then the oil filter housing. And any active leak is really dangerous, because if it only drips one drop a minute, I don't know how many drops there are in a gallon, maybe somebody knows. Marty will probably look it up, but that's only so many minutes of drive time, and you will run out of oil in your engine. So if it's dripping while the engine is running from an oil pressure leak, you've got to take care of that. It's like having a hole in an artery. You're going to run out of oil. It's really dangerous to do. During our complete lube, we tighten up the filter head. Now, on the earlier cars, we changed the filter. In the case of an MGA, there's two great big filter rings, one in the block, one in the filter head. You get the filter all up in there, you tighten it up, you get it, 4 out of 5 times you do. The 5th time you think you've got it, and of course you dump 2 quarts of oil on the ground. But those, as a rule, don't leak much. The MGB oil filters, the spin-on, the top-loaded, even the bottom-loaded one, in that half year in 1974. Now, the top-loaded spin-on filters can and do leak, not the filter itself, but the filter housing. So get a 3/4 inch socket in a long extension, and put that up underneath there and tighten up that bolt. It's a half 13. It's the only half 13 bolt in the whole car. Huge bolt with a 3/4 inch head, and tighten up with that oil filter housing against the cylinder block. You can have leaks on the oil lines, either the pressure line or the lines going to and from the oil cooler. If you want to separate the lines from the oil cooler, remember that you must do that through contraction. You must do that through quenching. You can't quench without being hot. You can quench without being hot. You buy the compressed CO2 from Napa or O'Reilly's. and you spray it on there, and it goes to negative something real fast, and that might work. But my way of doing it is to take a propane torch. This is taking the steel nuts off the top of the oil cooler, heat those up with a propane torch, spend about a minute, just a minute on just keep waving the flame around and around and around. And you have a 5-gallon pail of water with a lot of rags in it. And after about a minute of heating it up, you turn the torch off, you grab a pile of those rags, pick them up, and put them around that fitting. Wait for it to cool, and use your 15/16 wrench and your inch wrench, and they ought to just unscrew. Ought to unscrew almost by hand. If they don't, if it's still tight, heat it up again, maybe a little bit longer this time. But that's the way to get dissimilar metals apart. So if it's leaking up there and you want to tighten it up, you can't tighten it usually without loosening it. So loosen it all the way. Put a lot of grease. I love grease. Put a lot of grease on the fittings and snug those back down, and then you'll probably be okay. So that's the only thing that leaks on the right-hand side of an MGB engine is the oil filter and that line that comes out of the back of the block and then goes through the oil cooler or goes through a hose or a pipe and goes right back into the filter. The left-hand side of the MGB engine has the front tappet inspection cover, which always leaks. When you buy a new gasket, KS809, that was the old gasket number, they're too small. I'm hit my mute all here. Thank you. So they're always too small. So go to Napa, buy some impregnated cork, and cut a new gasket that's a lot wider on the outside, and use a lot of gasket goo, the right stuff or ultra black, when you put that front tappet inspection cover back on. The rear one's okay. He's fine. He won't leak because he's got a piece of cork that's trapped in there. But the front one is and the real early MGBs, 3 main Bs and the MGAs, that gasket may not fit. It may fit on the rear, but it won't fit on the front. So make your own. It's a real source of oil leaks. And then of course there's the valve cover. So all oil moves backwards and all oil moves down. So you're looking at oil dripping off the back of the engine. It's like, oh my gosh, the seal's bad, but it's not. It's the valve cover. The valve cover is leaking and the oil's moving down and back, and it ends up there before it drips on the ground. You can find an oil leak by going to Napa. I know Napa has this, and get oil dye. Actually, it's just dye. You can put it in any system you want. But it's under a ball camp part number. I don't have it in front of me. Anyway, you put this stuff in the oil, go out and run the car for 10 minutes, come on back and hit it with a black light, a real black light. And wherever it is leaking, it will fluoresce like an electric banana. There'll be no question where the oil is coming from. And that's really handy. Then you've got the front and rear seals on the engine. So those can and do go bad. They will eventually rub a slot into the front pulley on the front end, whether it's a T-type or an MGB or an MGA. You can get a speedy sleeve again to go over that area to restore the diameter there. Actually, it increases the diameter ever so slightly, but the seal still fits it. Use a lot of grease when you're putting it back together, and be careful when you're using a speedy sleeve. You end up with a raw cut edge, which can slice a seal up just instantly. So you have to apply the masking tape on the front of the speedy sleeve so the seal won't catch it as it's being fitted. The MGB rear seal, fitted with the 18 GB engines all the way through 1980. As I remember, the last time I looked in a popular parts catalog, they had a listing for two, one for like $9.95 and one for $29.95. Buy the expensive one. Taking the engine out isn't worth the $20 you're trying to save. The back of the crank also gets a groove in it. You go, well, wait a minute, this is a rubber seal. How can a rubber seal put a groove in a steel crank? Because the rubber groove is so soft that it holds dirt, little tiny pieces of dirt. And that dirt is harder than the steel. So it holds it there, and then as the crankshaft is spinning, that dirt cuts a slot into the steel. Anyway, that rear crank, when you go to put a speedy sleeve on the rear crank, which is an SS350 because it's 3.5 inches in diameter, when you go to put that on, you have to install the seal backwards, unless the crank's out of the car, which is like, what does that even mean? Well, if you go to do it, you can always call me, or you can take a look at it. You go, well, this is the way you're supposed to put it on, and this guy says to put it on backwards. So anyway, and that you have to be, again, you got to be really careful and use a couple turns of masking tape on the back end, so that when you do put the rear engine bearing plate carrying the seal, when you put that on the back of the engine, it doesn't slice up the seal. So that's it. I think.
John,
Yeah.
a couple minutes ago, you mentioned your favorite approved gasket sealer. Can you repeat that?
Yes, there are two of them. They're both made by Permatex. One is called The Right Stuff. I think there was a movie about that. And then the other one is called Ultra Black. One of them has silicone, one of them doesn't. I just use them interchangeably. I don't use anything like that. I don't use any kind of sealer like that around gasoline. Just doesn't work. So, but either of those is just fine. We used to use RTV silicone sealant, the blue stuff. You know, the blue stuff comes in the tube, engine sealer and everything. But that blue, if you're working on a Ford with a blue engine, then okay, all right. But blue on an MG engine that's either red or black, no way. No way. It just doesn't, it doesn't, it looks so ugly. And then I started using clear silicone sealant that you'd use on like on a storm door or something, just a clear silicone sealant. That works just fine. But now this stuff is better. The Right Stuff and or Ultra Black.
Hey, John,
Yes, Guido.
where does the oil in the SU carburetors go? I mean, where?
It doesn't. It doesn't. It stays there. In a Stromberg, it gets sucked away because there's an O-ring between the oil and the tremendous vacuum at the bottom of the piston. But the oil in the SU, it must vaporize. I don't know, but it doesn't go very far. When you go to put that damper back into the SU carburetor, and you get right to the threads. You get right to the threads. That's the minimum amount of oil that you can have in there. But if you fill it all the way up, and then push the damper, the AUC 8113 or 8114 damper down into place and tighten it up and start the car up, oil shoots out. Oil shoots out of the top of those carburetors. And lubricates the linkage and undercoats the bottom of the car, but then it stabilizes. The level stabilizes in there. But you should never have to keep adding oil to SU carburetors.
And if I have to, what's the reason why I'm adding oil?
Either a misunderstanding of how much oil is supposed to be in there, or I don't know. That's a blind.
You like 90.
blind
You said
hole.
you like 90 weight.
Yes. Thicker oil. Although the experts will tell you, so I guess I'm not an expert. The experts will tell you that the viscosity of 90 weight gear oil is the same as 2050, but feel it, it's thicker. So Yeah, the thickest
Yeah.
oil you can get in there, that it accounts for some wear, and it gives you better acceleration. It gives you much richer acceleration.
So if you go to all these heroic efforts, is it really worthwhile if you're only having to put oil in the car about every 500 miles?
Depends what your wife says about the floor of the garage.
My building is separate from the house. She is not allowed there.
Then I guess it's up to you. You know, it's you can buy a pizza pan. You can buy a pizza pan. You don't even have to put anything in it. You don't have to put newspaper or kitty litter in it. But then what are you going to do when it all gets drooled up with the oil and grease and stuff? But yeah, I just, that's a pretty simple solution. So
A friend of mine,
we haven't talked about oil consumption. And oil consumption is either from leaking or burning. And if it's not leaking it, it's burning it. But the cars always, all of the cars leak a little bit. They just do. Especially that the midget engine and the T-type and the MGA 3 main, MGB 3 main engines that don't even have a rear seal on the back of them. On the back of the crank, they've just got a scroll thread that screws the oil back into the inside of the engine. And that works pretty well. There's always a drip. There's always a drip around there someplace. But if the inside of the engine starts to pressurize at all for some bizarre reason, it'll blow oil out of there. There are kits that you can buy to replace that system for both the MGAs and the T-types.
one of the things one of those discussions on the MG experience has always been, what about PCV and all that sort of thing? A lot of people clog up their rocker cover. They don't let it vent. They seal everything up, and then it blows oil out everywhere. They don't seem to understand that the engine has to breathe.
There's a lot of that compression. Well, I don't know a lot. What, 1%? Something that gets beyond the rings. It passes through all those little gaps and passes by the rings and gets down inside the engine. It has to go someplace. So you've got that oil draft tube as big around as your thumb on the T-type, and then as big around as your little finger on the 3 main engines, and it just dripped out on the ground. There's just an oil vent tube to vent the excess pressure on the inside of the car. And the early T-types, I had a picture of that when I sent out my constant contact with that real cool finned valve cover and the really cool finned side cover. There's no vent. There's no vent. We had a guy send us. I was so impressed. He shipped us his TD from Alaska. And he told me, he said, I had a guy up here, and he's working on it. And I picked the car up and I drove it about 4 miles and I got this great big cup. Bam! He says, so, I quit driving it and we took it back there and it turned out a rocker shaft had snapped. It's kind of bizarre. He says, so he put another rocker shaft in it and that one snapped. At that point, he says, I lost confidence in what the guy was doing. And so I'm sending it to you. I said, okay, all right. So we went through and it turned out that the valves couldn't open far enough. You got coil binding, and the valves were too far into the cylinder head. So we got that sorted out, but it wiped out the cam and the lifters, and we did all that kind of stuff. And we're running it, and I can't. It's smoking. It's smoking. And he called me up at one point, and he said, "Well, how's it coming?" I said, well, it's still smoking. He says, oh, that's why I had it rebuilt. And I said, you told me you had it rebuilt because of the snapped rocker shaft. He goes, well, that was the second time. I had it rebuilt in Texas, because it was smoking and they couldn't get rid of the smoke. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute. This is, so I went to the side cover, and sure enough, it was one of those finned aluminum covers, and it couldn't vent. It couldn't vent. So we made some little things out of hardware cloth and took some chore boy and stuffed it inside there for some, the poor man's attempt at an oil separator. And That was it. And that's all it ever needed. Didn't even need a rebuild in Texas, 3 years before. So yeah. If your engine pressurizes.
John, a lot of people with T-types, with the TDs have replaced the old oil bath with the dry filters. And when you
Sure.
do that, you need to do something on the valve cover because that tube that used to go to the oil bath is not there. When I got my car, the previous owner's solution was a cork, which is not the best solution because of exactly what you're saying. That pressure's got to go somewhere.
Yep,
So a little filter works nicely. No oil gets out, and it works.
yep, almost looks correct. Yep. Very
John,
cool.
on the transmission, the overdrive screen,
Yeah,
we instead of putting RTV because it always leaked, I put grease. We put grease all around both sides of the screen. It hasn't leaked since I got it back from you. It has not leaked. And we check it, and it doesn't leak. The only leak I have in my car, I didn't have any leak for a while, then all of a sudden my tappet covers just started seeping. And I'm not gonna do anything about that because I'm not taking that manifold out just until I have to. It'll just seep.
Hey guys, on that overdrive,
Yeah.
Bob and John, do I have to? Can I change that filter and gasket? Mine's leaking on a 76B, and can I change that gasket without draining the trans oil?
only if you want to get a face full of oil.
It's under pressure, right?
No,
Oh.
there's a lot of it.
Okay, so drain it first.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to, I think if you were to jack up the back of the car, put the back of the car up on jack stands, take the filter assembly off, let it drip dry for half a day, you could go underneath there and get the job done with only 1 or 2 drops in your face. But horizontal, there's just so much oil that's in the gearbox that wicks that goes through some little holes and stuff. It's all the same oil. A lot better just to drain all the oil out and do it. You can reuse it. You can, if you have a clean drain pan, you can reuse that oil, put it through
Right.
a filter screen or something. You don't have to change it, but it's only 2 quarts, and you can use cheap O'Reilly's or Napa 2050 in there, or 30 weight non-detergent, whichever you might choose.
Oh, okay, not 90 weight, huh?
Not in the gearbox, no. It
Oh,
does-
2050, okay. Yeah.
It does work. We've taken out ATF, we've taken out engine oil, and we've taken out 90 weight, plus God knows other stuff too. In about 1977 or 78, there was a confidential service memorandum sent around to all the dealers that said, "Oh my God, we're so stupid. We've been telling everybody to put engine oil in the gearbox, and that's wrong. It's supposed to be 90 weight." About 9 months later, another confidential service memorandum came around that said, "We don't know who wrote that, but it's wrong." So, so now a TR6 uses the same type of overdrive, and it works just fine with 90. I mean, any oil is better than no oil. The proper oil is better than any oil. And Esposito from Quantum Mechanics says use non-detergent oil in the overdrive, especially in the overdrive, because sometimes the detergent in the normal oil will cause bubbles, and you can't have bubbles in a hydraulic system. I've never ever driven a car whose overdrive was working poorly that I ascribed to foamy oil. But that's what he says, 30 weight non-detergent. I tell people just use what the workshop manual says, 2050, just cheap oil.
But non-detergent.
No, it can, no,
Oh.
just engine oil, just engine oil.
Oh, in the overdrive, okay. Huh. All right.
Yeah, John, when driving through, it was 100 degrees or more. My overdrive kind of slipped a little bit when I put it in gear, and I imagine it was foamy, but you can't check it when it's hot. You burn your fingers. So I've never seen foam, and I just used 2050. I was going to use the non-detergent. I said I've got a lot of 2050.
Just to clarify though, the T-type is the exception to what you just said. It uses 90.
Oh, yes,
Everything else uses the standard engine oil, as I understand it. Is that right?
that is correct. So the TC gearbox and the TD gearbox uses GL4 8090, as does the Midget 1500, which is a Triumph gearbox. And then all the rest of them use engine oil, but a 1275 gearbox or a Spriget gearbox, those can get pretty noisy. So those we used to put 90 weight in those just to make them a little quieter.
John, TCs are supposed to use 140.
And the gearbox, or is that the diff?
Yep. Gearbox and diff.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
And John, you
Yes.
mentioned the pizza pan for a catch can
Yeah,
or catch basin. A friend of mine turned me on to the idea of using a child's snow sled, the little plastic sled with the pull handle on it, or the pull rope, to put under the TC, because they always leak. And so it's been really handy to just slide the sled under there, catch the oil.
has it got edges on it? Or is
No.
is
It's
it
just one of
flat?
those plastic sleds with a rope pull handle.
So you pull it out, you wipe it off, and you
Yeah.
slip it back in there. Okay, all right.
But when you go down the mountain, don't you get oil on your butt? Sorry for that.
Thank you, John.
Makes it go faster.
Yep.
John,
Yes.
you
Can
you
I ask you a
mentioned,
quick question?
Oh, well, yeah, Dan, you're on. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm
Then
doing
we'll
some of
back.
this stuff you're talking about today, and I had real trouble. In fact, I unsuccessful replacing an oil seal in the rear of the B today. I did the differential. I got the front wheels with bearings but I couldn't press in a new seal
Into
without
where?
damaging it. What's that?
Into which part?
So I had everything apart. So I was pressing the seal into gosh, it mates up against the car, right? There's it should be the oil seal in the collar,
Is this the wheel seal or the pinion seal?
wheel seal.
Wheel seal. And this is a later model MGB?
71 MGB.
Okay. So normally you take that spacer out. There's that spacer with the two slits in it. There's a hub, the hub comes off, right? The nut, the conical washer, the hub
Yeah.
comes off. Now
Yeah.
underneath all of that, you can see that spacer that rides on the outside of the half shaft. You grab that with a pair of screwdrivers and wiggle it and pull that out. Now you've got a gap there, and you can get underneath there and pop the old seal out. But the new seal, you ought to be able to put it up and just tap it round, very gently, very cautiously. But some of the seals, they got a lot of thickness on the outside of them, and you can end up bending them. If you're hitting them too hard. The trick is to go round and round and round and round and round and round and round, and if it gets on an angle,
Yeah.
take it out, start over again. Put grease on the inside of it. Put grease on the outside of the seal, so it'll press into place.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the other way is more tedious, and that is take the brake backing plate off, which means you got to disconnect the brake line and the handbrake cable. Take that off, and then take the housing that actually holds the seal and pull that off. Now you can put it flat on the bench and hammer at it.
That's actually what I did. I had the seal out. I had the half shafts out. I had the differential out of the car.
Okay, all right.
And I tried to press it in with clamps, woodworking clamps and hardwood, so it was nice and even.
Sure.
And it crushed it malformed the oil seal. And on one side of my car there's a rubber plastic seal in it. I left it alone. And this one here, it had a metal seal. I put it back because I don't know what the hell I'm gonna do. I don't I don't know that I see this. I have a collar in there, but I don't know that I have this thing you talk about getting the two screwdrivers and separating.
That's the collar. That's just to
Oh,
grab
okay,
that
I got
collar.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, chances are you can order up that rear hub oil seal from any couple of stores
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
down the street, Napa or O'Reilly's or something. They get a lot of those. I mean, there's only so many seals, and that seal it fits an MGB from like 67 through 80, and it also fits a T type, fits a TD and TF. So it's a the next time you order obviously order a couple extra. Maybe it's just a faulty seal. I don't know, but normally there's not a problem putting that in.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Okay.
your help.
Yeah, sure.
John,
Yeah.
you mentioned the scroll thing on the back of the crankshaft of some engines. I think that's what the 948s and 1275s have. Am I right?
Absolutely correct.
So if the problem is always that the engine's not vented, that there's pressure buildup in the engines, why do they make these other seal kits for that?
Because even if you have a vacuum on the inside of the engine, even if you do, the oil's going to come out of there. So the way to do it properly, okay, is they chuck the crankshaft up, engines all apart. Chuck the crank up and they touch that scroll thread with their stone and make sure it's absolutely round. Then they measure it, and then they get the housing at the rear of the engine about 2 thousandths larger than that, which is like phenomenally tight against there, but not touching. That's the trick. So we used to get the always on a 3-man engine, you get the bottom end of the engine a line board, so that the holes are all concentric. So same thing with a T-type, but I don't know that there's a rear seal kit for a A series engine, but I'm sure there is. There's one that's that whole.
It looks like you haven't set up any home accessories. You can connect smart devices like lights, locks, and thermostats in the home app.
You know, they're spying on us too. Anytime they want to listen to what's going on in my house, they can just tie into my phone. It just came on by itself. It's amazing. Anyway, there are seal kits for the three main A and B engines. For the T-type engines, I'd never fit one of those. I would never fit a T-type rear seal. Oh my gosh, I never had any luck with those ever. And I talked to Glenn, who was shut down in Tampa, Florida for this recent hurricane. And he sort of shrugs his shoulders and says, well, I fit them all the time. I don't have any problem with them. You know, you've got to be really, really careful when you're setting those up. But anyway, he has great success with the T-type ones, and I assume that there's got to be something available for the Sprigget engines too.
Mr. Twist?
Yes, sir.
This is Justin. We were talking about transmission fluids and whatnot earlier, and so I wanted to mention something. I was spending some time in a race shop last year, I think it was, and we were talking about transmission fluids and things of that nature. And this shop did a lot of British racing cars, vintage racing. They would maintain and repair those and whatnot. And so the discussion was about different fluids, and what was suggested to me, and I tried it and I really, really liked it. So I wanted to put it to the group. And of course, to you, if you've had any experience with it, was the AC Delco 10-4014. It's a synchromesh transmission fluid it's friction modified and partly synthetic and whatnot. It's expensive as all get out. I checked it on Amazon. It's $18 a quart at the moment.
That's only you only need 2 quarts in our biggest gearbox. Tell me what that stuff is again.
It's AC Delco 10-4014.
Okay.
And what I really liked about using it, and I've got it in the transmission now and have had so in the last year or for the last year. I really like it shifts smoothly right when I start driving. You know, when I was using motor oil, I would drive carefully, and as it got warm or more oil around and whatnot, it would shift smoother. This seems to shift smoothly from the get-go, and it doesn't seem to change as it gets hot.
Okay, thank you. There's a who makes MT60, MT90? What's that? There's a
Yeah, I've seen that
Redline.
too.
Redline. Redline. I've heard of that. I've heard a lot of people say that. This is the first time I've ever heard of this product. So thank you for passing that along.
John, I have an additional question on gearbox lubrication.
Sure.
If you're paying $18 a quart, how often do you change the oil? I thought it was like every 6,000 miles or so.
Oh no, that's way too much.
Way too much.
It doesn't get dirty. The only thing it gets in is little chips of metal when you miss a shift or something.
And that was the other thing. I thought with non-detergent oil, the sludge will go to the bottom, which is what you want in a gearbox, so it doesn't circulate and cause erosion. Whereas a motor oil will keep things in suspension. So your non-detergent 30 might be the better choice, or it's immaterial.
I've never done any experiments. I've never pulled gearboxes apart and been able to say, oh my gosh, look at this guy. He was using non-detergent oil.
Okay.
There's, you look at a gearbox and there's a lot of stuff to keep that oil in motion. It's unlike an engine where the oil sits in the bottom. The gearbox, of course, it's rounded a little bit, and you got that lay gear in there, the counter gear, it's speed. I mean, that's causing a storm of oil to spin up all through there and everything. So,
No combustion,
anyway,
no combustion in gearboxes or rear ends.
yeah,
We don't have blow by.
yeah. There's no polluting the oil. There's just little chips of stuff in there, and those do settle out. Those do sit down at the bottom. So you can always put a magnet in your drain plug if you want, although that doesn't catch the brass, of course. But I would say changing the gearbox oil once every 12,000 miles, once every 5 years. That's more than anybody else in the world does it.
All right. Hey, I had one other question or comment.
Yeah.
I recently rebuilt a 3-synchro early B gearbox, and the rear seal had a metal housing around it.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are very difficult to get out. And
Yes.
before I attempted that, I looked at the hard carbon throwout bearing, and it happened to be the same diameter as that rear seal. And so what I did is I drilled a few holes in it so I could shoot screws through that throwout bearing housing, essentially, without all the carbon in it.
Yeah.
And I screwed that into the seal because I didn't have a slide hammer.
Okay.
And then I could take a 32-ounce ball peen hammer then, and I could tap the ears of that throwout bearing, and it made it really easy to pop that out. And I know some guys want to replace that seal while the gearbox is still in the car.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
That would be a good tool, I think, for somebody that's in a car that maybe not on a lift, to be able to use a hammer and then those ears from that cast piece as your leverage to work on each side of that seal to pop it out. Mine came out unmangled, and I was almost sorry I took it out. They came out so clean, but I put a more modern seal in its place.
Sure. Very cool. Very, very ingenious. Thank you. That sounds real great because you got the hole in the middle. It goes right over the main shaft. So
yep. Cool. And I initially wanted to use that piece as a a point to put a regular seal puller on, so I wouldn't mar up the aluminum at the edge of the seal.
Sure.
That was my original intent, and then I realized, hey, I'll just screw this thing in there and bang them out without damaging the casing of the gearbox.
Very cool. Very,
Worked good.
very
John, I have a suggestion that
Yeah.
has worked well for me on my MGA. I've got a nice little thing called the MGA diaper on it. I made it using a 12 by 18 cookie sheet, drilled holes on, 2 holes on both ends, and I wire tie it to the frame and it fits in there perfectly. So then all you got to do is put something in there to catch the oil. And what I found really, really works good is a thing called Quickie. Let's see, it's microfiber floor mop.
Okay.
And they sell it at Lowe's for $9 or $8, I guess it's $8, I think. And I drive about 5,000 miles a year. It catches all the oil. I don't have to worry about driving up on my friend's brand new concrete driveways and things like that. It really catches everything out of that rear main. And once a year, I jack it up. I clip 2 of the plastic ties, pull it down, get that old soaked up one, throw it away, put in a brand new little mop catcher, and tie it up again. And I've done that year after year, and it really does a nice job.
Very cool. Very cool. I had a guy up in Northport who bought an MGA, and he said it had either a Modest or a Kotex stretched underneath to catch the oil wicking out of that. Yeah. So this is a little more manly. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
Any more comments about oil leaking, oil dripping?
Yeah, one question, John, is the scroll on the rear of a 3-main engine, does it only leak once the engine turns off because it's not spinning backwards and it's considered a passive leak?
What happens there is that it leaks while it's running, and it'll occasionally drip while it's running, but the flywheel is blowing the air around with such force that it traps the oil all on the inside of the bell housing. Then when you stop, then all that oil is free to move, and it all runs down towards the bottom and drips out. So you turn the car off and all this oil drips out, and you're going, why is it leaking now? Because it was trapped all on the inside of that bell housing. But the engine only turns in a clockwise direction. There's a seal like that there is a scroll thread on a TC differential on the pinion, so that theoretically, if you back the car up too far, it's going to screw the oil out of there. It doesn't really, but anyway, that scroll thread is there's no oil pressure behind it. So it's a passive leak in that it only leaks when the engine's running, but there's not oil pressure behind it. But there's so much oil, there's so much passive oil behind it that you'd almost consider it. I mean, there's a lot of oil getting squirted out of the rear side of that main bearing. You got a deflector in the way. There's a lot of stuff there to try to cut down on the amount of oil that's coming out of the end of there. I know on T-types, and on early MGAs, there's a tube that comes off the bottom of the rear main, so the oil goes down into the sump. Some people cut that tube off in the belief that prohibits the oil from getting down into the inside. You can also, on those engines, you can also put a PCV valve, like a Smith's PCV valve on it, that they use from 64 through 68, and on any of the engines, and you just have to take care of the side cover and vent that up to there, so that it does put a depression on the inside of the engine. You can do it on a T-type also. Takes some rigging to do it, but you can do it. And that'll cause the inside of the engine to want to evacuate, which is going to tend to pull the oil towards the inside of the car rather than pushing it towards the outside. Did I even answer your question? I went off on a rant.
Yeah, I've got a new to me 63 engine. It's a G engine, and I don't even think it's a GA, and it doesn't leak back there. So I must have a draft tube that's working really well.
Yeah, yep, and the scroll thread is working like it should.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just more clues on how many miles are really on the car. Maybe it's got low miles.
If it's not leaking, it must. Yep.
Or it's out of oil.
Oh, that's the joke, but it's the truth.
Yeah. All right.
John, I
Yes.
wonder if the boot clutch release on the transmission, the rubberized boot that's in there, mine's all, it's all corroded and it's all falling apart. Do I need to drain the oil out of the transmission to replace it, or is there some? Or I just peel it off and see? I've ordered a replacement, but it seems to be very, very difficult to get on.
What year model?
78 MGB.
Oh yeah, it's a bitch.
Oh, thanks. That's really, really encouraging. That's a good thought of encouragement.
Yeah, it's something to do during the summer here, huh? Where are you calling from?
California.
Oh, all right, okay. I picked up it must be Australian accent.
It is, yes.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
originally from Brisbane.
So I thought you were going into summer, but anyway.
No. I've acquired the car here, and I just honestly use it to play around with them.
Well, it doesn't make a whit of difference whether that boot's in place or not.
Oh, that's what I want to know.
Not really. Not really. It's supposed to keep stuff from getting into the inside of the bell housing, but what's going to get in there? Now, Paul Handley dragged an engine and gearbox, an early one, into his garage, separated it, and the whole inside of the bell housing was filled with cockroaches. He thought maybe that they were feeding off the oil. I don't know. But that's the only time I've ever heard. His wife had something to say about that. That's the only time I've heard of anything getting into the inside of there. But that boot's just supposed to keep moisture out, stuff like that.
Okay.
It's just a terror trying to change that. But it is square. It's a lot easier than the elliptical ones that they fitted earlier. So you got to drop.
It's just getting it round where it joins, where the arm actually joins, because there's I thought of even putting a slight cut in it so I could get it around that section, and then just clamping it with a C clamp or something around it just to hold it and seal it.
If you leave the push rod on the fork,
yes,
and then take masking tape and swirl it around the push rod.
Yep.
In the fork, and put a whole lot of grease on it. You push it on there, right up past it.
Okay, I'll give it a go. Thank you.
Well, one way that we found out that worked was we took the boot and boiled it, and then we had it was at the end of a long neck bottle or cut off the end of a funnel and grease, and it slid right on. I shouldn't say right on. It was still hard, but we
did get it to slip on without having to tear it.
Yeah, because one time we did tear one, and then the tear gets bigger and bigger. So, just boiling it really makes it soft and pliable.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
A lot of that also depends on where the rubber was made.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think I got it from Moss.
Yep. Well, everything, help me out. Everything comes from Moss, right? It really does. If you buy, it used to be in the days of Victoria British, you'd say, now, who's Moss's biggest customer, is Victoria British. So, they are the source, and the only way they know that stuff isn't working well is for you to call them and tell them, that stuff is, and it's odd too, because we just got done replacing an engine, and we bought the uprated motor mounts, which are too thick, they didn't work. And then Craig called out to Moss and talked to one of their tech guys, and the tech guy says, I don't suggest even buy them. He says it puts too much vibration into the car, they're too stiff. So, it's a huge operation. They've got, 100,000 line items between, midget 1500s and Jaguars. I mean, they do the best they can, and thank God they're there for us, because what would we do? We'd all be ordering out of England. Not that that's a bad deal, but some things continue to be problems for years and years and years, which is frustrating, like the quality of the rubber. Anyway, enough of that.
I have found that the rubber parts I've been getting from Rimmer Brothers has been better quality recently.
Okay. Well, that strip that goes underneath the windshield on the MGB, it's all but impossible to change. I just had a guy from, Pennsylvania, said he's going to drive to Grand Rapids and have old person memory problem here. Bruce from Harmon Glass. He says, what do you think? What do you suppose he charge? I said, well, nothing compared to driving all the way here from Pennsylvania, staying overnight in a hotel and taking it to Bruce. What's he going to charge you? If he charged you less than $50, it'd be so defeating, He's charged at least that. He used to charge us 15 back in the day, and he just put that right in. But the Moss seal was like so stiff. And then the one that Runyon sold out of the Roadster factory was perfect. And the one that Victoria British had was so soft that when you're putting the windscreen in, if it fell out, you had to take the windscreen back off and put it and reinstall it. So there's always different suppliers, and some of that stuff that comes out of England is the quality is a lot better.
I can't get anybody in Eastern Pennsylvania to change that seal. I just don't feel like doing it myself. So I bought 2 seals. I put them in the trunk. I mean, when the opportunity, what a bite. The old seal is fine, but what do you call it? Unclipped, if you will.
Yep.
And it started to roll under. And it's like annoying. You don't notice it that much, but I missed it when I bought the car. I missed it.
You need to go to some place where somebody specializes in British cars. No glass replacement company will touch an MGB Roadster. But Steve Shillington used to do it for $1,100. So I told my insurance company that's what it's going to cost them. They said, okay. I should have said I meant $1,200, but yeah.
I went to two places that specialize in right around me, and you guys probably know the places, but they both hemmed and hawed, and I said to them, "You really don't want to do it, do you?" And they said, "We really don't."
We've done 3 of them.
Who was the 2 places?
The Roadster in Sowersville, PA. Roadster, Ragtops and Roadsters.
Did you try Proper Noise?
No, and then I tried the Triumph Rescue. The nice
Try
people.
Proper Noise. Proper Noise. Mount Penn.
Where are they located?
Mount Penn, outside Reading.
I'll do it. That's an hour away. Proper Noise.
Proper Noise. Ed Sweeney.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, we've done 3.
Are you referring to the seal that goes around the window?
Underneath the windshield frame to the body, where the windshield wipers are, up there.
There's a guy in Canada called McGregor, used to work for MG, that sells a real easy one to put on. Well, easier. It's not easy.
Martin McGregor. Yep.
Yeah, he sells a first class product.
Oh,
I got it on my car.
You just got it, but getting him on the phone sometimes is difficult.
But getting him off the phone once he's on the phone is harder.
You know how
I
Gloria
used
does
his
it?
product and it worked great on my car.
Yeah.
How Gloria
Okay.
does it? She starts in the middle, which seems strange to me, but she starts in the middle and then works out. And it's a long, tedious.
Some wine on the deck.
This car behind you, I did this back in April, and it was my first time doing it. It worked pretty good. The tougher part was the rubber that goes around the glass, because the one Moss sent me was 5 inches too long. I had to cut off a section and reglue it.
Okay. Now, better too long than too short, maybe. So, all right, I'm gonna go over into chat here, and Marty's put up some stuff about paint colors from last time. A link to it. My next one here is, what would be the estimated labor effort for replacing the cross member bushings on a 1980 MGB? So that's from iPhone to everybody. So I don't know who asked that question. Are you still on? Anyway, if they're not on, that's okay. To replace the cross member bushings, there are 4 of them. There are only 4 bolts that hold the cross member to the frame. The 2 rear ones are slam dunk. You can get right to them and see them and everything. The front one, you have to get the front coil spring out of the way, which means you got to drop the front suspension apart, the front of the front suspension, which means you got to take the sway bar loose. So you got a couple hours on each side at least. So I would say 5 hours, up on the hoist. Somebody who's young and virile and going at it, I'd say it's at least a 5-hour project to change. It's really frustrating. And if you're going to do that, you might as well do the rest of the front suspension at the same time, because you got so much of it apart. So Marty's got a direct link here for the PayPal. Thank you very much. Bob Dalton says Louisville, but we've already got California, so it's a long way away. Don Bueller, I have an oil leak in my left rear axle. Wanted to know if you should replace the brake shoes on my 52 TD. So if you've got oil leaking on the brake shoes, there's no way to get the oil off the brake shoes. You can use carburetor cleaner, good carburetor cleaner, with toluene and methyl ethyl ketone and stuff like that, and spray it and blow it off, and spray it and blow it off, and spray it and blow it off. But then in the end, you'd want to separate those shoes and put one of them that you've cleaned up on the right and one that you cleaned up on the left, and the good one on the left and the good one on the right. But I wouldn't even do that. I just get new shoes. That you just cannot get rid of oil out of brake shoes.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hey, nice. Our complete lube form is up. Marty put that up. MGA, it's been sitting for years. Just push it around by hand now and then. Leaving out transient engine, what seals do you think should be changed? Well, do the complete lube. Get a copy of that complete lube. Who's 59 MG? Who are you still on?
That's me, John.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, so I would I get the complete lube list, and I just do it all. The brakes are bad. So if the brakes are bad, you might as well do the rear hub oil seals. This is an A, so you might as well do the pinion seal because it's so easy to do. And you're there right now, you're going to drain out the oil anyway. So you drain out the oil, change all the seals, change all the brakes, put it all back together. And then the front hub oil seals, you're going to grease those. So you're going to end up changing those too. So that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, doke. Yep. Marty's got some leak finder dye here. I'd click on it, but I don't want to lose my screen. So Rich S. Hi, John. I was planning on pulling the engine out this winter to address an oil leak that is getting somewhat worse over time. A static leak. I haven't dug in yet, but I noticed oil drops in several places underneath the engine. Of course. Any guesses where this is coming from? The main puddle seems to be in the general vicinity of where the transmission meets the engine. Anyway, and then he says, oh, sorry, he has to run. He's not on, and he's got a photo, but that's the rear oil seal. If you're taking the engine out, you're gonna do a clutch. Anytime you take the engine out, you do a clutch. Anytime you get the engine out, you attend to the seals and the gaskets, because it's so much easier with the engine out of the car to change the side covers or the front and rear seals. You can't change the rear seal with the engine in the car. I suppose you could take the gearbox out. Oh my God, it would be impossible. So Marty also has a link here on Permatex and the right stuff, if you want to see what that stuff looks like. And Dan G says, I replaced both front oil seals with no problems. Couldn't replace the rear oil seals, too tight, even when pressing. But I think we've already answered that. So Chris, to everybody, MGB boot, clutch release arm. Yep. We answered that one too. So, and Brad Schwartz has a Flow Tool galvanized drip pan. So, I'd almost make a comment about the drip pan underneath the MGA and arguing about whether you even needed to have something in there to collect the oil, for the oil to sop up. If you just leave it sit when you're driving, it's gonna spill out. The wind's gonna blow it out, reduce the amount of dust in the air by putting some oil on the street. Undercoat your frame just a little bit, and yet when you turn the car off, it won't be dripping and it'll be collecting the oil. That's what the T-typers do. And here we've got Brad, who says that he attached a wood block to each corner of the drain pan, I guess, to keep the oil pan off the floor. That's good. In large cardboard boxes, that works. I've used those a lot. And then you have to slice them up. They look pretty nasty after a while.
Old shower curtains are also good.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. Jim Nakos asks, I was wondering if the oil pressure relief valve also acts as an anti-drain back check valve. No, it does not. I have a clattering on cold start. It's a 63B with about 90,000 miles on it. And it takes 2 or 3 seconds for the clattering to stop, and then instantly the oil pressure builds up to 50, 60 pounds. It never happens more often than at cold start after sitting for a day or so. I've heard you talk about putting a spacer in for higher pressure, but I believe my pressure is fine according to the norms I've heard about. So are you still on? This is a good question. Jim, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right. So the reason that it's clattering is because the rod bearings are toast. Okay, so get the sump off the engine. Now you can do that without lifting the engine up off the motor mounts unless the motor mounts have sagged a little bit. If they have sagged, you've got to disconnect the mounts from either side, jack the engine up with a block of wood, underneath the sump, jack it up and put 2 pieces of wood, half an inch thick or so, underneath the motor mounts, just to get it up so that you can get to the front 5 bolts on the pan, on the sump. Take the sump off, take the rod, take the one of the rods apart, look at the bearings. They'll all be coppered up, and you'll just see copper. There won't be a whole lot of bearing material there. And look at the back of them, see what size they are, and order new ones and just change them. It's the least you can do. You can also get another oil pump. It's a perfect time to put another oil pump in. What kind of oil filter do you use?
It's one from Moss. It's a cartridge type.
Okay, so it's still that long
That long thing,
long
yeah.
thing with it takes a 5/8 wrench to get it in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
I had the engine out and transmission out. I resealed everything, even put an oil pan gasket on it. So I was in there already and I didn't look at those rod bearings. So now it's all back in. And now I'm addressing the clattering. And I thought, no, that's valve train. It's probably just drain back. But
you haven't got enough oil pressure there to fill up that distance. All the MGB is 68 through 71, 68 through 69 have got a vertical oil filter which empties
Wow.
when you have it off for more than about a day. And you start it up, oh, it's just horrible. I shudder. It's so horrible to hear that noise because that's metal against metal. And that's doing a lot of damage.
So that should not really happen at all, that sound, right?
Never.
All right, good winter project.
Yeah.
Thanks.
While you're doing this, as expensive as it is, you can also pull the center main and change that. Why wouldn't you change the front rear main? Because you can't get them out without taking the engine out of the car. But if you got the sump off, you can, or I just did this on just talking about Craig West, who had this MGB that had been off the road for 28 years. And we just did it. We just, jacked the engine up so we could get a wrench on it and took the sump off and changed the rod bearings and changed 3 of the 5 mains. It's got a 5-main crank. So you had to buy a package with all the bearings in it, and only use 3 of them. You got to buy the whole package and only use 1. It's very, very frustrating.
That's the middle one, yeah.
But that's all you can do. So other than take the engine out, take the crank out, and all of a sudden you're into an engine rebuild.
Right. Okay, thank you.
We did this a lot. People say, I got 90,000 miles on my engine, and what can I do? What can I do to extend the life of the engine? It's like, replace the bearings in the oil pump, and you get another 90 out of it, before you have to take it apart. So.
And the size of the bearings are printed on the back side of the.
Correct. It's it'll be 010, 020. If it says nothing or STD, it's standard.
Very good. Thank you.
And you can always call me when you got it part way apart and FaceTime or something or other. We can look at the bearings and stuff like that.
Okay. Would you recommend a plastic gauge in that?
Oh, you should. I mean, yeah, sure you should, but all you're going to get is bad news. You're going to get 3,000s or 4,000s, and you go, oh my God, it's supposed to be 2. I better take the engine out and rebuild it. So it's just, you can make a case for it. But all you're doing is asking for trouble, so.
John, we worked on a TD that sat outside for 33 years.
Oh my gosh.
But it was under a cover, never saw salt. All the bolts came loose. We deep creeped it today. But anyway, we never pulled the engine apart. Made sure the generator was working. We did a whole new interior because there was things living in there. And something died in the exhaust system. But anyway, we put a new distributor in, tuned it up, went to start it. It's rolling over, and it wouldn't start. And I touched the carburetor linkage. It was hot. I said, well, there's no ground. 33 years that car sat because they pulled the engine, did a clutch job, and put the ground in the wrong place. But when it started, there was no clatter. There was hardly any smoke. That's a tough little engine. We were impressed, and the owner was even more impressed. But I remember asking you if I should take that job. I don't know if you remember that. You said if the engine turns over, it'll start. It's an MG. We pulled it. It turned over. It started. We surprised ourselves. But I'm telling you that the bearings must have been okay. There was no clatter whatsoever. I'm sure they could be replaced, but we weren't going to get into that.
I've got bearings that are all coppered up, perfectly coppered, no grooves, just like they were polished copper. all the bearing material's gone. Those are great. Those will suffer new bearings just fine. Once they start to get grooves in them, then you're asking for trouble. And then I've got T-type bearings that were, the car was run hard, put away wet, and then we got it or something. And you take the bearings out and it looks like worms. Looks like worms had eaten out the bearing material. It's so bizarre. And it's from all the acid in the oil. So it's yeah, anyway. Changing bearings. It's talk to anybody. Oh, just take the engine out and rebuild it. Well, first of all, you got to find a rebuilder. That's one thing. And then you got to wait a year because he's backed up. And then it's at least $1,000 a cylinder. So you're looking at least $4,000. And everything you look at is faulty if you take the engine out. If you take out the crank, the crank's worn a little bit, the cam's worn, the lifters are worn, the chain's worn, the tensioner's worn. Geez, the cylinders aren't round anymore. It just develops an appetite, and pretty soon you've expended $4,000 or $5,000. This is putting bearings in is just a temporary measure, but it really helps extend the life of the engine.
You know what it says in the owner manual it says you should change the bearings every 50,000 miles.
Yeah.
Which is kind of
It
silly.
does? Where? What owner?
It was our 71 that we used to have. It said change the bearings
How did I miss
every
that?
50,000 miles.
Yeah, you do that, the engine will run forever.
Well, there's a guy in he's out of business now. Was in Atlanta, had a boneyard and a repair shop.
Yep.
And we were there. I can't think of his name now, but nice guy. A guy came in with an Austin Healey 3000, had 9,000 miles on it.
900.
No, 900,000 miles. And every 300,000 miles, he would bring it into this guy and have him rebuild the engine, whether it needed it or not.
Okay.
It's 900,000 miles on that car. That was amazing.
Amazing. Pat, you're trying to.
Yeah. I used to think the same thing about when I would see bearings like you were describing, that had wormholes in them.
Yeah.
That's actually caused by air bubbles. And when the power stroke happens, the crank goes down and pops those bubbles. And when it does that, it blows the babbitt right off the bearing. So that's why you have anti-foaming additives in the oil.
Okay.
Another reason to change your oil. Those anti-foaming additives wear out. Oil doesn't wear out, the additives do. So you get air bubbles and they pop and they destroy the bearings.
Okay. All right. I haven't heard that before. I just got them downstairs, but it'd take me a while to get them. I can't leave.
Yeah, I know exactly.
I've
seen it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
John,
Yeah. Pete.
many years ago, I had an MGA, a $400 car. It would not start unless you coasted down a very steep hill. Fortunately, I was living in San Francisco at the time, so that was okay. I figured something in there was too tight. So working on the street, since I lived in an apartment, I took the pan off, loosened up the bearings, torqued them down by guess, because that's all I had to work with. And it was fine until I sold it. Started normally and ran fine.
Yeah. There are a lot of field repairs you can do. We used to, we put sometimes we put tin foil behind the bearings just to get them a little tighter. There's all kinds of stuff you could do. In the American cars, there's shims you'd put between the cap and the rods, just to open it up just a little tiny bit. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Oh, go ahead. Justin, go ahead.
Going back a few comments and concerns to startup and noise and that sort. What I've used as a habit with my car, if I haven't driven for a week or two, when I get in, I just crank it for a while until I see the gauge move. Or if I've got my windows down because it's summer, I can actually hear when the oil pressure hits before I see it on the gauge. And then I push my throttle the one time that I have it set up for, so I can crank it because the high idle and the choke and everything's ready to go. So if I had an engine with noise, I would probably go through that process, because what I do when I change my oil, because I know there's no oil pressure anywhere, I'll pull the coil line and I'll crank that sucker for a while. If I have to do more than 20 or 30 seconds, I'll stop and let the starter cool, and then I'll do it again until I see pressure on the gauge. Because I know sure as heck, if I did it right after an oil change, it would be banging on things dry.
Yep, we always did that on oil changes. You know, you get it all together, and then just either T-types and A's, you spin the starter motor over without turning the key on. But B's, you had to be careful not to start it. Just pull the coil wire, something or other, and spin it until you get oil pressure. Absolutely. Yes, that's a real good idea. Yep.
John, can I interrupt from England?
Yes.
You've been talking about oil and oil consumption. A mate has a Jaguar XK150. He's had a bunch of problems with that, but it used a ferocious amount of oil, smoked terribly. And I said to him, there's nothing wrong with your engine. You've got the wrong dipstick in the car. And he had a dipstick after a lot of investigation from a Mark II. So he had about 5 pints too much oil in that car. And it had been into some professional places. So my urge to people would be, measure the oil you put in your car. Don't rely on the dipstick.
Very interesting. Very interesting. If you got a couple of quarts of extra oil in there, oh my gosh, it's going to splash up. There's a jillion things that are going to happen. Fortunately, on the MGBs, they take 4 quarts. I mean, unless you got some monster filter on there or something like that takes it. But I remember 4 quarts. 4 quarts should put you up to the A on max. Just
right.
A little over. Probably better to be a little over than a little under. But oh my gosh, so that's interesting. Yep.
So we have the problem in the UK of people putting a dipstick from a Mini into a midget, or from an A30, if you remember those, into a midget, or from a Morris Oxford into an MGB, because they just think it's all the same. The sump pan's different, the dipstick's different, and I just don't understand why garages in particular, they just go to the dipstick, not to the quantity that's gone in.
Interesting. In Enjoying MG, it must have been 20 years ago, there was somebody, whoever was responsible for taking the dipsticks and putting them into the press that stamped the high and low on it. They put the dipstick in backwards into the machine, and so here's this dipstick, and the guy says, every time I add a quart of oil, it gets lower. What is going on? And it was a stamp backwards.
On the same subject, I've got a 1071 Mini Cooper S, and our next door neighbour, who's 85, was an apprentice at Leyland at Longbridge when these were built, and he my Mini uses a bit of oil, and he said fill it to the minimum, not the maximum, and to prevent warranty problems, they raised the level on the dipstick to make people slightly overfill them rather than underfill them, so that when they did burn a bit of oil, they had more leeway. So, and sure enough, I fill it to the minimum and it burns almost no oil.
Interesting. Those are 2 wonderful additions.
Anyway, it's called at the 2 in the morning, so I'm going to bed. So good wishes to you all.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right.
John, can I ask you a question that's bothering me?
Yeah.
Every oil pan I see has in the same place. Have you ever noticed that?
You're breaking up just a little bit, and I missed the critical word.
The oil pan.
Yeah.
Every time I look at every oil pan I've come across on the MGAs, MGBs, they seem to have the same dent located in the same area.
Yeah.
Why? Is
I don't know, maybe but you put an oil pan on the concrete floor and take a length of 2x4 and a 3-pound hammer and put that on there, bang, bang, and you can flatten out the bottom of the pan again.
I just noticed it's the same spot.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe people put jacks underneath them. I don't know. The magnet, the Z-type magnet has a reverse because of the front suspension, has a reverse sump. So the deep part of the sump is in the front. So when you're looking at a magnet from the front of the car and you look underneath, all you see is this great big part of the oil pan, which is just waiting for a stone or a real heavy duty stick or an ocelot or something or other that's died in the middle of the road. And so the manufacturer, the BMC, provided a skid plate for that, so that you wouldn't run into the sump with something hard. It was they didn't call it an anti-skid plate, but it was for colonial conditions. So yeah, in case you happen to have your magnet in the United States or someplace. So, let's see. Here we go. This is Pat Garrity, who's come in about something else. I had a TC in high school with worn splines on the hubs and axles in the rear end. So anyway, there were Cotexes or something rolled up on the inside of the hubs as those leak. Yep. And now you can get those expandable freeze plugs. It's about 2 inches that you can push those in, and it's got a nut on it, and tighten it up and they expand, and that'll hold the oil inside there too. So. And here, Judd's got Declan Burns TD oil catch can. That's kind of cool for catching the stuff. And then we've got a link on here. Marty's given us a link to Rimmer Brothers and McGregor. The owner's retiring, businesses for sale. I'd heard that. Marty's got that up there for Martin McGregor. He would like someone else to take over his business. Isn't that the song of most MG people right now? The people in the trade. Everyone's looking for someone to take over their business. So Stephanie Hill. I just got to finish rebuilding my MGB front end, A-arms, bushings, rack, inner tie rods, outer tie rods, et cetera, 6 weekends of work. Oh my God. Charge the battery, turn the key, nothing. That never happens. So anyway, Stephanie, you still on? So anyway, no good deed goes unpunished. I think that's the deal there. 6 weekends of work, you charge the battery and turn the key. Yeah, why not? Let's see. John to everybody. Oil leak on the front engine seal on a 69 Sprite with a 1275. Do I need to pull the engine to replace it? No, but I think you probably have to get the rack and pinion out of the way and jack the engine up. I'm not sure, but you don't have to take the engine out, but close. So it's radiator comes out, all that stuff comes off the front end, and then the rack will come off. You can push the rack maybe far enough ahead so that you can get around that. And then the nut on the front of that engine is 1 5/16. Getting that nut off, you need a real heavy rattle gun, or you've got to use, or before you take the engine loose, you've got to use a wrench. Lay that wrench on the left-hand side of the car, which is the right side as you're taking a look at it. the driver's side, if it's an American spec car, you put the wrench on there with a breaker bar on it, lean it to, you're looking at it, you're leaning it to your right, and have somebody operate the starter motor, and the engine starts to spin, and it'll spin clockwise as you're looking at it, and that will unscrew that front bolt. If you have the wrench on the other side, on the passenger side, and you're holding on to it, you'll break your arms. I mean, it's like, oh my God, how dangerous is this? So you got to know for sure that you're leaning it up against the driver's side of the car and holding on to it, but you can get that front nut off before you take the engine loose. Tom Gunderson, is anyone ever anodized side curtain frames? Tom, are you still on? Getting down to it here. Anodizing side curtain frames. This must be a
Yeah,
just get them powder coated.
okay. Well,
I
I
mean,
thought that powder coating may add too much depth to it, like a layer of paint.
well, sure. Okay. So I guess you can have them plated. I've never heard of it because the original is this for a T-type or an A?
It's my car got burned a little bit in a fire, and so all of the frame's okay, but the rest of it was just junk. So I just finished cleaning it up and everything, and I thought to myself, I like the way one of the frames looks. I think it's for a 1600 series that was black with the sliding windows.
Okay.
And so if you did this, you could do the same thing with the earlier weather shield frame, but if you had it anodized black, it looked like that 1600.
Sure. I haven't heard of that, but sure. If you find somebody to do it. It's a thinner coat, absolutely a thinner coating than paint or powder coat. Yeah.
Let me mention one other thing. I was driving Saturday. The car ran great. And then all of a sudden it's like somebody turned the key and cut off. I sat on the side of the road for a little bit and went through all the scenarios. Finally, I went back to the shop. I called my wife. She came and got me. Well, it wasn't but a few miles away. And I got a coil. And I said, well, this is the easiest, it's the quickest way to check it. And I just scabbed it in there, and daggone thing started right away.
Odd to have a coil fail like that.
Yeah, well, and the coil is fairly new.
That's
why would that just drop out?
If it wasn't a faulty connection, then maybe the coil failed. You know where all that stuff comes from now, and the quality is high. I mean, even if somebody buy Napa, I mean, come on. I mean, and talk to anybody else in any other, the Model A guys. I
think I got it from Napa.
Yeah.
Interesting, John, because my MGA, the Mark II, same color as his, did exactly the same thing. About the second year I had it, it was like you turned the key off. I came home on the ride of shame, and I thought maybe it had to do with the Petronics ignition, and I was going to try to replace or dig that out. And the coil was just soaked with oil.
My gosh.
And I put another coil in. So now, you always carry what you never need again. So I always have a coil in the boot of the car now.
All right. What do you suggest? What kind? Whose coil would you suggest?
I just got that gold thing from Moss. I'm a big fan of Napa. Theirs is probably as good or better.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Judd, what's that article that it's up behind you about
I
when?
was scrolling through to look at something to put up there into some old images on the computer, and that's actually my mother in a tank in 1942.
Very cool. I was hoping there was some connection. That's your mother. Oh
Yeah,
my
she was
God.
driving the tank at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Yeah, that was 3 years before me.
Okay. All right. Hey, how very cool is that? Oh, very, very cool. Yep. Yep. Oh my gosh. All right. So Chuck Lennick. Chuck, are you still on?
I am. That was just a response to John and his question about
Oh,
the
oh,
front
oh.
the front
Oh.
seal. So
Oh yeah, got it. Got it. Got it. All right. Okay. All right. Well,
however, can I ask you a quick question? Because I tuned in a little late, and it was right when you were talking about the front subframe pads. Do all these all years have the subframe pads in the front?
yes.
They do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
I will be rebuilding my front suspension. All the bushings just need to be replaced. And I was like, well, it was all apart. Like I thought I heard you say I was going to replace those if it had it. So
now, if I know your desire for how nice stuff looks, so this is the perfect opportunity to take that whole front suspension piece off there. Just let the rack and pinion dangle or tie it up with some zip ties or something, and take that whole front
subframe off.
subframe and take it to the powder coater. There's $300, right? And just get the whole thing sandblasted and put back together. This is also the time that you can think about getting those anti-caster shims. So the right now that you've got caster, camber, and and on the front wheels. So there's more caster than there needs be. They didn't change that when they went to radial wheels, and some people say that the driving's a lot easier to turn the wheel if you put the anti-caster shims in there, but they're phenomenally expensive. They're like $150 or something. It's crazy town. Geez, it seems like you could do that with something else, but anyway, the whole deal is to tip that cross member just a little bit to reduce the caster, which means you're going to have to reposition the rack and pinion on it. But that's not a hassle. Anyway, this is the time to think about doing that. I can't think of anyone I know who's done that and said, "Oh my gosh, it's the best thing I ever did." But just to put the rear ones, just to put the original ones back up in place, yeah, you got to have those springs out of there and reach up in there, and it's easy enough to do. That front cross member is really heavy. And you take everything off it before you drop it down on the ground, because the vise you have right now, which is the car, you can really struggle and get everything loose and everything apart, while it's still on the car, and then put it on the car bare and then build it up on the car. So
that was my plan, and yes, and you are correct about wanting to clean it. And
yeah, sure. You've still got your work area, your work unit.
Oh yes.
Okay, you got a hoist in there.
Yes, and my lift and
yeah. Okay. Yeah, all right.
So okay, thank you.
Hey, you're very welcome. Well, it's right up against 9 o'clock, so I'm happy to entertain any more questions that anyone might have about anything from piston diameters to air pressures in the tire to gasoline or oil. Otherwise, we're going.
I have a piece of interesting information. Somebody turned me on to a BBC show. Well, it's on PBS. It's called Moonflower Murders. And one of the lead characters drives a beautiful 67 MGB. I looked it up and they said, yeah, it's not completely stock, but it's just nice to see an MGB on television for a change.
It's nice to see it. There was it who played Margaret Thatcher? Glenn Close? Who played, there was a sort of a biopic about Margaret Thatcher. And it starts off where she, she's getting kind of daffy because she's so old. She's long out of government, and these are all thinking back to when, when she got involved. And when she won her first by-election and went to Parliament for the first time, she's driving a Magnette. And then later on, she's in the car park at the Houses of Parliament. And I don't know how far up the line she's got at the scene. I don't think she's prime minister yet. But she opens up the rear light of her Harvest Gold 73 BGT and throws her valise in there. So yeah, it's nice to see MGs. If you want to get a full picture of what's going on with MGs, you don't go to the Internet Movie Database, IMDb. You don't go there. You go to the Internet Car Movie Database, ICMDB. I think it's the Internet Car Movie Database. And then it says, select the model or the year or the mark. So you select MG and they break it down. You want to see an L type, you want to see a Q type, you want to see an MGB. Here are the movies that go with that. Do you want it to be it just shows up like there's an MGB, at 62 minutes and 38 seconds at a stop sign, because it's got nothing to do with MGs? Or do you want it to be a focal point of the movie, like Love Story or Funny Farm, that TF that they drove off the cliff? That was sad. Anyway, Internet Car Movie Database, and you can see so many. And then what was the husband and wife, the detective team in the 50s on television?
The Thin Man.
What's that?
Was it the Thin Man series, Peter Lawford?
No,
No. Pool and
so we're all trying to tax our boomer brains here. It was a husband and wife, and they drove a TD and they solved crime. They solved crimes. So anyway, there's lots of stuff. But thanks.
Sometimes on Rockford Files, a lot of times you're paying attention. I'm looking at cars in the 50s, 70s, and they'll use the same cars in the background. There's a little white MGB that appears in every few episodes. You see this little white MGB, and it's just kind of.
My late wife and I got sucked into Dallas, of course, and there's a guy out of Southern Ohio, J.R. Brown, and he was about, oh my gosh, he was a real short guy. He must have been 5'2". I mean, he was real short. He'd hop out of his TD, and it's like, oh my gosh, he didn't look that short inside his car, and everybody called him JR. And of course, that following that season, he had a T-shirt that said, "I shot JR" or "I am JR" or something or other. But there was another one that something landing, that Knots Landing, that was a spinoff from that, and the principal in that one was driving a midget 1500, and it was by the side of the road and it was steaming. And he says to his girlfriend, he says, "I think I blew a head gasket." And I said, for once, they got it right. 1500s blew head gaskets all the time. And, it's like, yes, that's what would be wrong with that car. Anyway, try Internet Car Movie Database, something like that. And there's a series out of England, All Creatures Great and Small, maybe about a veterinarian before the Second World War. And he drove something or other, I don't know, a P type, or I don't know what it was, J type, something or other. So there's
it was a Rover, John, a Rover Roadster.
Well, no, in the original.
Oh yeah, this is the new series.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
Hey John.
Yeah.
Hey John. Preferred method of jacking up the rear of the car. I'll be doing that in a couple of weeks now for fluids. bottle, floor jack under the
diff.
the diff,
Yep,
and then jack stands.
at the front of the leaf springs. Probably not on the leaf springs, but right at the front of the leaf springs.
Where the bolt goes across. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Or just in front of that.
Oh.
If the car's got any rust on it at all.
No.
Okay, all right, then you can support right in front of there. So, yep, that's a real good spot, and then the differential will fall and you can service it.
John, Stephanie has a question in the chat, but she doesn't have a mic. So can you read that last question?
My 77 MGB left rear seems to be sagging a little. It also makes a metal on metal sound when I'm making a hard turn. Any ideas? So there's two problems going on here. One is it's the bachelor lean. That's what it's usually called. And that is because the driver's seat is always occupied. The passenger seat maybe rarely. So the leaf spring on the left rear of the car sags. When the left rear sags, the right front of the car rises because the car pivots on a diagonal from left front to right rear. So as the left rear goes down, the right front comes up. The height of the chrome strip, if you take a measuring tape and go from the ground through the center of the wheel to the bottom of the chrome strip on all four corners, that should be within half an inch on all four corners. If it's sagged considerably, then you want to rebuild the rear leaf springs. If you're concerned about cost, you can switch the springs. Put the sagging one on the right side, and then when you get it into the car on the left hand side, then maybe it'll balance out. You can get new springs, but new springs, the quality of the new springs is erratic. It still is, I think. They might be too stiff, they might be too weak, or they might sag after a little bit, which is real frustrating. We always got ours rebuilt. It always worked. Now, when you're going around a corner and you get that metal scraping sound, that's usually because the brake drum is rubbing against the brake backing plate. So to see where that's occurring, take the wheel off, back the brakes off, and take the brake drum off, and you'll see the shiny spot on the brake backing plate where the drum is rubbed against it. You take a hammer and adjust its position, bang it a little bit towards the inside. You can also remove a little bit of distance on the drum. If you can see it's always the same place in the drum, you can take a Dremel tool, take you 13 days, but it's some sort of die grinder or sander, and just sand that part.
Or brake blade.
Well, yeah, but we're talking to Stephanie, and my guess is that she's doing stuff at home. So, I mean, I never had a brake lathe. Glenn does in Florida, and Mark Branda has a brake lathe. But yes, that would be a way too. Absolutely, yeah, and just take a little tiny bit off there. But in the meantime, a sander will do it. So, yeah, hope that works for Stephanie. So anyway, it's 9 o'clock. If I get any more questions, I'm happy to take them. But otherwise, we'll say goodbye. And so that when's the next one? Marty, did we set that up? Are we going to have that on the 28th?
We haven't finalized, but we did discuss that.
So that makes the next month either like the 11th and 25th. That's okay. So we'll do our next Zoom on the 28th. Thank you for the 82 people who are still on. Thank you for hanging in. We don't have a subject yet, but you can email me or Marty and like propose some subjects. I keep saying it's about time to go back to SU carburetors so we can get Fred on, and if I put an exciting title on it like the secrets of the SU carburetor, like all of a sudden we'll jump up to 200 people 200 people again. But anyway, so I've got to ask my official my official counter, Doug Clark, what did you have tonight for numbers?
John, I noticed 151.
Okay,
That's what I noticed.
okay. And what sort of hat do you have to go up against mine?
Okay, John. Well, today is I guess you'd say observed Columbus Day. And in addition to my MGs, I also have an Italian car. I've had it for 35 years, a Fiat Spider. And my mechanic, who works on other Italian cars, Alfa Romeos, Ferraris, and every year he invites a lot of his customers to drive down in the Chicago Columbus Day Parade. Basically what it is, you assemble downtown on State Street, just off State Street. You wait around for at least 2 hours for your 15 minutes of Andy Warhol fame, driving your car down State Street. You might get in a second gear, but there's a lot of horn honking and all that. But anyway, in honor of that, I have a cap with dual American and Italian flags on it. It's a cap, and then after that we drive down. There's an Italian cultural center, and the organizers actually invited this year 3 busloads of indigenous tribal nation people to join in the festivities, the food fest. So that was something. But so this is the hat. Like you said, it's a flat cap with the American and Italian flag for Columbus Day, John. So
very cool.
You have to wait another year before you see this one.
That's okay. So I brought a hat. So this looks a lot like my hat. Okay, except it's fawn instead of a darker brown. But this is my original, the original cap from Dunn & Company, out of a company long since gone. This is one of my original hats from 50 years ago that I bought, and I've kept it. I've kept it pristine in case I need to go to some tailor and have them make me a hat. Because I was just on the hat company website looking for the hat that I have been wearing for the past 10 years or so, which is Failsworth. I don't know if you can see that, but Failsworth. Yes. But this cap, which they call the Mariner, this is called the Clipper from Dunn & Company, the Clipper. They still don't have they've got like 1 or 2 hats of each color, and they don't have any more in my size, and I'm waiting for them to make another batch of them, or I've got to go buy them someplace else. Anyway, that was my hat for tonight, but yours is great.
Don't you order your Failsworth hats in bulk?
Like but the last time I ordered, I ran them out, and they haven't refilled yet.
Okay. You're their best customer, I think, John.
Well, maybe. But they've got them in blue and black. Okay, all right. But I always wear mine in like sort of a light tan. So
good.
So that is the news from the MG news from tonight. So Tim was on from London. That was very nice, with a comment about his Jag and the dipstick. That was handy. Very nice. And we got some we got gearbox oil information tonight, the AC Delco gearbox oil. Anyway, I thank all of you for staying on, and be sure to go to the website, think about me, on this Columbus Day, observed Columbus Day, whatever that is, and go press the PayPal button and help me out a little bit. That'd be very kind. And we will see everybody on the 28th for a subject which is yet to be determined. So anyway.
Thank you much, John.
Thanks a lot, John. Thank you, John.
Night. Good night.
Thank you, John.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, John.
John Uhas, I see
Thanks
you on
again.
tonight. Tom Snook, I see you there. John Clark, See you tomorrow morning at 8. Yep, yep. Sean? Oh,
Hey.
Sean from DC, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, John. Thank you.
Great.
I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. Jim Pastor, didn't hear from you tonight, but you Jim's whole shop is covered in carpet. So the cars can't leak. So he's got all kinds of stuff down there because you can't have soppy I can't have carpeting that's sopped with oil. So yeah.
Tried that once.
Good night, John. And we'll see what we're gonna do. Send us some ideas. So all right, until then, safety fast. Thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure. So
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
see everybody
Thanks,
later.
John. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Good night, all.